Hello everyone, James Crocker here with Crocker Realty. Before I get started, if you like this video, please share it or like my page on Facebook. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you find this information useful. If not, then that's okay. In this video, I want to talk about earnest money. So if you are thinking about buying a home, there are a few things that you need to know about. If you're thinking about selling a home, there are a few things that you need to know about earnest money as well. So for those of you that don't know, and some of you do, but you may not know all the details with regard to earnest money. For those of you that don't know, earnest money is basically a deposit that a buyer will generally put down when they make an offer on a home. So if their offer gets accepted, then that buyer will deposit that money with the title company, and then that money will sit in an escrow account. When you go to close, that money will be applied toward the buyer's down payment and or closing costs. In Colorado, normally earnest money is about 1% of the listing price. So if you have a home that's listed for $500,000, for example, usually the earnest money is going to be about 1% of that, which in that case would be $5,000. Some people do believe that earnest money has to happen for a contract to be accepted. That is not the case. Earnest money is not required, but pretty much anybody that's selling a house is going to require some sort of good faith deposit. If they don't have that, and the buyer terminates the deal in a place where they're not allowed to, the seller has no recourse, no damages that they can collect or anything like that. With earnest money, if the buyer terminates a contract in a place where they're not allowed to, and I'm going to go through that, then the seller would get to keep their earnest money. So if you are thinking about selling your house, there are some things you need to know. If you're thinking about buying your house, I'm going to go through those things first. So as a home buyer, your earnest money is very well protected. If you're working with a good real estate agent that tracks their deadlines and stays on top of their game and keeps you informed about what's going on, your earnest money is always going to be safe, okay? So in our contracts, there are three main deadlines, and there are a couple of others as well, but the three big ones are the inspection, objection, and resolution deadlines, the appraisal deadlines, and the loan termination deadline. So as a buyer, you're going to probably do a home inspection if you're smart. Pretty much all my clients do home inspections. I have a really good home inspector, and it's also important to make sure you get the right things checked out when you have that done. By the way, I'll talk about that in another video. If something goes wrong during the inspection and there's something about the house that you're uncomfortable with, or there's something wrong with it that the seller refuses to fix, as a buyer, before those deadlines, you can terminate the contract. You would get all of your earnest money back, completely safe. The only money you would be out in that circumstance is the money that you spent on the inspection. The next step is going to be the home appraisal. If you are under contract at say $350,000, then the house comes in and appraises for $325,000. What that means is the lender's only going to loan you an amount based on that $325,000. If the seller refuses to come down to that price, then you have the option of terminating the contract. You would get all of your earnest money back at that point. Again, this has to be done by the deadline, so it's very important that you're working with an agent that tracks those deadlines and takes care of that for you, because if you work with an agent that's inexperienced or doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't do the best job and they miss one of those deadlines, it can cost you your earnest money, and that's a major problem. And the third big deadline for earnest money is what we call the loan termination deadline. And this is generally the last deadline in our contract. It generally occurs about a week before closing if you do a 30-day close. That's really the date by which you have to terminate. As a buyer, if that date passes and everything is not good to go, clear to close, and you don't close, your earnest money's gone. So it's really important to make sure that your loan is fully approved by then and everything else has been done. If your loan underwriting has an issue and there's something wrong and the lender doesn't say you're good to go, you're clear to close, then as an agent, what I'm going to do if I'm representing you as a buyer is I'm going to try to extend that deadline. If the seller refuses to extend that deadline, then I'm going to threaten to terminate the contract. And usually they will extend it, because if they don't, now they have to start back over and go find a new person to buy their house. They have to put it back on the market. They've already spent, excuse me, my camera fell over, you guys. It's kind of weird. The seller's already spent, quite a bit of time. The seller's already spent quite a bit of time going through this process. They do not want to start back over at square one, believe me. So usually they're going to go ahead and extend that deadline. And if they refuse, as a buyer, you can go ahead and terminate and get your earnest money back. Or if you'll at least be aware of it at that point, you can proceed forward and take that risk. But it's rare that you'll ever take that risk. If you're working with an agent like myself, my buyer's earnest money is never at risk. I always get the people to extend the deadlines because I know how to have that conversation. Now, if you're selling your home, really important that you get a good amount of earnest money, at least 1% of the asking price. This is what I always ask for when I'm listing a home for sale. There will be circumstances where someone might make an offer with less earnest money than that, but we don't have to accept that. It's important that there's something. If you receive an offer as a seller and there's no earnest money or it's a very small amount, you're taking a lot of risk because there's nothing that stops that buyer from just going away and you have no recourse for it. Now you're back to square one again. There has to be something on the line for them. They have to show that they're serious about this process. If they don't have $1,000 to put down in earnest money, or $5,000 in this case, how are they going to make their down payment? How are they going to pay their closing costs? These costs are way more than that. They should already have this money, and if they don't, then something's not quite right. They may be getting a grant of some sort in some circumstances, but they're still going to need a certain amount of money to close, and usually that's going to be at least $5,000. It's not always the case, but most of the time it is going to be. So as a seller, it's also really important that you're working with an agent that knows when the buyer's entitled to get the earnest money back and when they're not. I've seen circumstances where I was representing a buyer and we terminated the contract due to inspection or appraisal, and the listing agent doesn't want to give the money back. The seller doesn't want to give the money back. It's not an option. They're either going to give it back or they're going to go to court, and they're going to have to give it back, and they're going to have to pay court costs as well. So as a seller, it's important that you know when the buyer is allowed to get their money back and when they're not allowed to get it back. A buyer cannot just terminate a contract at any point in time and get their earnest money back. There are rules to this. So if inspection has passed, if those deadlines have passed that are in our contract, and the buyer tries to terminate due to an inspection, can't do that. They've already lost the opportunity to do so. And in that circumstance, if they say, well, we want to terminate due to inspection, and we say, well, that deadline's already passed, and that same day they send us another termination a letter that says, well, we want to terminate due to loan termination because we don't like our loan terms. Well, is that really why they're terminating? Or are they terminating due to inspection and now they're just trying to change the reason? So as a seller, there are places where the buyer's allowed to terminate and where they're not allowed to terminate. It's important that you're working with an agent that knows where those deadlines are. There's a lot of details to that I don't want to get into this video because it's just going to take too much time. But most importantly, as a seller, if you are working with an agent that is thorough and handles everything like they're supposed to handle it, when you get to closing, that money is going to go back to the buyer and they're going to handle what they need to handle. But if something goes wrong during the process or the buyer tries to terminate in a place where they're not allowed to, it's important that you're working with an agent that understands that. On that note, if you are selling your home and you're working with me and today is the buyer's loan termination deadline, today's the last day they have to really terminate to get their earnest money back, I'm going to do what I can to fight not to allow them to extend that deadline because I want their earnest money to be at risk. We've gone 3 weeks or maybe even longer in some cases. If you have to start back over from square one, I want there to be some recourse on the buyer's end. So there are ways to negotiate that. So anyway, guys, there's a little bit more to earnest money than what I just went through. This is just kind of a quick overview. In a nutshell, as a buyer, your earnest money is safe in almost all circumstances if you're working with a quality agent. It's always going to come back to you if something goes wrong because there are deadlines where you have that option. As a seller, there are some things that you just need to be aware of so that the buyer doesn't get away with something that they shouldn't have gotten away with in terms of that earnest money. It's important that you're working with an agent that understands how this stuff works. So anyway, guys, I hope you have a great day. If anybody has any suggestions for any future videos that I can make that if you might have questions about something or something that you're curious about, please leave send me a message or leave something in the comments. I'd be happy to make a video covering anything that you might have questions about. And again, if I can be of service to you or your loved ones, I'm always happy to help. Again, my name is James Crocker. I'm with Crocker Realty. My number is 720-235-7388. Have a great day.